I thought you were standing on the chair when you got up there, Ned.
Being 7:30, I'll call the Marathon County Board of Supervisors to order. Will please rise and recite the Pledge of Allegiance, and please remain standing because that will be followed by a moment of reflection. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And we will have the reading of the notice, please.
The adjourned annual meeting of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors, composed of 38 members, will convene at the Marathon County Courthouse, Assembly Room, 500 Forest Street, Wausau, on Tuesday, February 25th at 7:30 p.m., and the agenda was duly signed and posted.
Thank you. I'd like to request that everyone silence their cell phones and any other electronic devices or put them on vibrate as to not to interrupt the meeting. And we'll proceed to roll call, and I request that the supervisors please sign in. And we'll proceed. And I'd like to welcome all of the visitors that we have here tonight with us, and also like to extend a warm welcome to anybody viewing online. So we will move on to item number B, consent agenda. We have items B7 through item 12E1. What is your... Supervisor Rosenberg with the motion and Supervisor White with the second. Any discussion on any of those agenda items? Any discussion on any of those agenda items? Seeing none, we will proceed to vote. And we will proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. And we'll move on to ordinances. Item C, 13, ordinance amending General Code of Ordinances for Marathon County, Chapter 17 Zoning Code, Ordinance 0-3-20. Motion by Supervisor Nutting. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Robinson. And we've had some questions, and we have a brief presentation by
By Dominic Swingstew and Scott Corbett.
Perfect, thank you.
Took me a while to be able to pronounce Dominic's last name too, so.
There you go.
Better? All right. I'd like to begin by thanking the board for giving me the opportunity to, give this presentation and, provide some insight and information in regards to the proposal and amendments and revisions to the Chapter 17 Zoning Code of Ordinances. So this process had begun at the beginning of early 2019 at the Infrastructure Committee level due to the usage of roads, and there was a company which was EDP Renewables which was at that meeting, and they had give a brief presentation in regards to a proposed project in western Marathon County. So we met with them and I guess went over a few different proposals to address like the potential size, location, and the overall usage of that system. So through those preliminary discussions, it was noted that the proposed site and project was to take place in 2 towns within Marathon County. And those towns are the town of Brighton and the town of Old Plain. Shown here, I'm kind of moving the cursor over it right here. So those 2 towns are county zoned, as well as both have the Farmland Preservation Zoning Program and zoning districts. So moving forward, we've had a few questions throughout the community with town officials as well, just with interest in regards to why this particular system or proposal is taking place in Marathon County and specifically within those 2 towns. So this map here shown, provided by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, kind of gives an idea of the average annual wind speeds at 80 meters, which is approximately 262 feet. So as you can see here in the orange, it's slightly higher speeds than throughout the other portions of the county. So this is where this is where there was interest into place a new system. So after preliminary discussions with EDP, Corporation Counsel Scott Corbett, as well as CPZ staff and other entities, we moved to review the existing Chapter 17 ordinance and see what regulations and standards apply, and see if there would need to be any changes to be made to it. So shown up here is the regulatory framework for wind energy systems. So through reviewing our ordinance, it was noted that there was some revisions that needed to be changed and amended in our previous ordinance or our existing ordinance, given these proposals have not been adopted yet. We had solar and wind energy systems clumped together in one section, and given state statute, there are, I guess, separate regulations for wind and solar. The primary statute is Wisconsin Statute 660401, which applies to both wind and solar, but there is a Public Service Commission administrative code that highlights a lot of the specific application requirements, processes, and standards that apply to these types of systems. So prior to drafting, we had worked with Scott Corbett, the Corporation Counsel, to see, I guess, what options were available to us moving forward. Discussions were made at the department level and then with the towns to see, I guess, how the towns wanted us to move forward. So we met with both the town of Brighton and Old Plain, of which the proposal was to take place, and they both had indicated that they wanted the county to address and adopt regulations within the zoning ordinance, and they chose not to adopt a town ordinance to be applicable just within the town and administered by the town. So as previously stated, after review, it was noted that there was some changes that needed to be made. And I'll bring you back to this diagram up here. So shown is just a summary of the wind siting policies within the United States. Shown in Wisconsin here. So there is a relevant policy, as I previously said, and the primary authority falls to the local level. So that is either the town, county, city, or village. So we can regulate up to 100 megawatts, and then here are just some standards that apply as well. So state regulations, I apologize that this is a little difficult to read on the table or on the screens up there. I'll just give a brief overview. So in 2009, Act 40 passed and directed the Public Service Commission to identify new rules and regulations associated with renewable energies, specifically with solar and wind. And then in the lighter orange up there, those are the resulting statutes and administrative code that came out of Act 40. As I had previously stated, the Wisconsin Statute 66041 and PSC, which is the Public Service Commission 128, which governed the regulations associated with the wind. And then also on the screen there in green, as I said with these 2 towns, the Farmland Preservation Zoning Program and District is in play. So there are specific standards and requirements set by DATCAP that need to be followed as well. And then in gray, lastly, are all the other zoning districts that don't have any additional standards set by the state. So with these different systems, the statutes and administrative code splits them up into two different categories, essentially. Small scale systems, which are systems less than 100 kilowatts, or a group of systems that produce less than 300 kilowatts of energy. And then the large systems are anywhere above that, up to the threshold of 100 megawatts. So the zoning permit would be required and would be subject to administrative review just through a general permit for small systems, and then a conditional use permit would be required, subject to the Board of Adjustment and administrative review for large systems. And as previously stated, for the Farmland Preservation Zoning District, there are special standards and requirements set by the state that would need to be met. So in these instances, those small systems for commercial use or uses that are not deemed accessory to the farm would have to be classified as a conditional use, and they would have to meet farmland preservation standards. And below here, I had clipped out the 5 key standards that are identified for the Farmland Preservation District, and those are inserted in the draft ordinance. So once we reviewed the language and the statutes, we thought we would reach out to different agencies and entities. As I previously had started this presentation, we started with the Infrastructure Committee and then kind of built up, got more information, reached out to different communities, counties, as you can see here, university professors, the Public Service Commission, town boards, as well as EDP, renewables attorneys, and representatives. So we looked at this as on a holistic approach to make sure that our ordinances wasn't too restrictive and it wasn't not restrictive enough. So we wanted to kind of find that balance between what we were allowed to do and what we were allowed to do, and also provide some consumer protection. So as I said, there was multiple inputs from different entities moving forward here. They all provided some great input and hopefully to provide the best ordinance in the state here. So lastly, I got a very simple diagram for you guys here. So this diagram identifies the application process for in this instance, a large system. So the goal essentially is to move straight down this diagram and avoid any administrative appeals. And then on the right-hand side, that is the pathway that would be followed if there were no ordinance adopted. So essentially, we wanted to strike that middle ground, follow all the state statutes, no more or less restrictive than allowed. And we believe that would be the best opportunity to process and review this application, just like I said before, providing with some consumer protection. Because if we decided, and it was decided that the county did not want to go down this path and not adopt anything, essentially, the company would still be permitted to put their system in as allowed by state statute, and the county just wouldn't have any review. So I think it was important for this community to adopt an ordinance to provide that consumer protection. So once drafting was complete, as I said, we reached out to professionals continuously to ensure that every draft we had, everyone could take a look at it, just to ensure everything was compliant with the state regs as well as was user-friendly, nothing like this diagram. So essentially anyone could pick it up and read through and identify those standards. We'd worked with EDP renewables attorneys to complete the ordinance as set forth today. The revisions provided clarity and essentially would update our ordinance to be compliant with Wisconsin state statute. In addition, we worked with Supervisor Robinson. He had brought to our attention some comments, concerns, and suggestions, which has resulted in some proposed amendments that may be set forth before you today. We also had some additional dialogue with EDP's attorneys this afternoon to clarify that language to ensure everyone is on the same page. All right, and once this, I guess, moving forward, when and if this ordinance and these revisions are approved, we'll start the process of working with the towns as well as the County Board of Adjustment to ensure there's proper education, so everyone is aware of the processes, requirements, and just so they're aware of anything that might take place. So we want to kind of work on the front end to ensure that everyone is aware, no one's really surprised. And from what I've heard from the towns, there isn't too much pushback in regards to this proposal. But like I said, we have not received an application formally, so we're awaiting that. I guess, sorry if that was a little quick, but I can open it up to any questions.
Well, that's all I have to say. So. I just wanted to make a couple comments in addition to what Dominique is saying. Dominique did the legwork on this, and he's done a great job. What we did is we took an updated ordinance from Iowa County, and we tried to update it again using all the other information that we could that we had at our disposal. I think I was saying on Thursday night, there's there's a balance between trying to write something that people are going to be able to read and understand, and then also citing the statute and the administrative code when we have to do that in order to indicate what the standards are going to be. So, and I think Dominique met with several people at several different meetings. I think the concerns of the townships and the people that you met, I think, really centered around notice when things are going to happen. And as part of the application process, the administrative code mandates that sets of notices be sent out in advance and then included in the application when they come in. And that's part of what we're going to do when we evaluate whether or not the applications are complete, is make sure that all those notices are provided. And I think the second issue that people raised was financial assurance regarding decommissioning when something happens. So, I mean, the highlights, and I kind of went over this with the Environmental Resource Committee when we met earlier this month, but the highlights of what we went over with the attorneys on the other, or I shouldn't say on the other side, the attorneys for EDP, were that we learned from the metallic mining ordinance that we went through last year or a year and a half ago, that there are going to be costs associated with the evaluations of whether or not, the issues surrounding where the towers are going to go up are going to be met. And again, as I indicated the other day in response to Supervisor Gums's question, there are some fundamental property rights that are involved in this that people can do what they want with their own property to some extent, and within that larger right, there is the authority of government to regulate. The state has a role to play here, and the locality is also allowed a role to play, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to step in to that. We're trying to make our regulations as stringent as we are allowed under the code and the statute. So the first thing we looked at was how we're going to recover costs for our evaluation of whether or not these systems are going to do any damage. And so we wrote in there into the ordinance that Marathon County is going to be able to recover its reasonable costs for these evaluations. Now, we also wrote in a provision that said, okay, if we've done several of these and we can figure out what those costs are going to be and we finally establish a fee, then we can establish a fee, and that fee is going to govern heretofore. But we don't want to get taken to the cleaners on the process of doing an evaluation. And the same thing goes for compliance monitoring. And we learned that also with metallic mining, that we want to be able to recover those reasonable costs. If we have to go out and hire experts, if we have to go out and hire engineers, that kind of thing, to evaluate, whether these things are going to create a problem, then we're going to be able to do that. But we're going to be able to recover our costs for going out and doing these things. The third issue surrounds the financial assurance, and as I said at ERC. The proposition of the folks that are building there are that these systems are, they have a life expectancy of around 20 to 30 years. So why are you requiring financial assurance for decommissioning now, right when we've got a $150 million investment going on?
Approximately.
That's approximately the amount of the investment going on. Why are you requiring us to do financial assurance now? And again, we looked at the statute, and we looked at the administrative code, and the administrative code says the local municipality may require these forms of financial assurance. And we said, we really are not going to, we're not going to change this. We think, there are variables, even to things like this. There are market forces, as we see in the stock market right now. These things are subject to subsidies. Those are government changes that can happen. There might be a change in ownership of the whole thing, and we would never, and so if there's a change in ownership, that ownership might view things differently, and they're acts of nature or acts of God. Tornado comes through, knocks down 3/4 of the infrastructure, and we want to make sure that there's money there to decommission. So these things could happen on day one. So that was a position that we strongly took, especially in light of what Dom had heard from the folks that he had talked to. And then the final thing is that most of all large wind systems are going to be subject to the conditional use permit process. And that necessarily requires public input. And what Mr. Robinson brought our attention to is that we had not mandated that kind of public input for small wind energy systems. And so we made a distinction between small and large, and we specifically wrote that in. And he had noticed that provision in the code, and so and I believe you plan to offer a substitute amendment, correct? Today? They are incorporated. We sent out both versions in the packet. The one that we presented on Thursday, and then the one that incorporates the changes you made. And when we sent those to EDP, they responded back saying, again, with respect to the conditional use permits, we want to make sure that those permits are subject to conditions that are authorized under the statute and under the administrative code. And we said, that is fine. We actually, if we don't see any problem in citing back to the code provisions or the ordinance provisions. So those are sort of the legal highlights from my point of view. So now I really am done talking.
We'll open it up to questions. Supervisor Schaefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does this affect, if I want to put 3 wind towers on my property, or does this only affect commercial wind generation? Like if as a citizen I want to put up 3 towers for myself, does this affect that?
Yes.
Yes.
So it's not just, quote, commercial wind farms?
No, it's the distinction is large and small. And
Right.
then if you're, so the 3 would be a small wind system. And that would not, you would only have to go through a conditional use permit process if the property is within farmland preservation. If it is not in farmland preservation district, then you go through a permitting process directly to the Conservation Planning and Zoning Department, and they make the determination regarding that permit. But again, Mr. Robinson's amendment makes sure that there's an element of your neighbors get to have a say, at least get to express themselves with respect to the system that you want to develop.
Thank you.
Okay, Supervisor Rosenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you both for presenting this tonight. I think you answered my questions about the conditional use permit and the public hearing aspect, and also that neighbors get public input. So I'll just wait to talk about this amendment. Thank you.
One thing that I did want to make sure that you understood is this is just one part of the entire Chapter 17 that we're bringing to you today. The wind energy system is 17405. 01 to 10, and there are some areas that overlap with respect to the conditional use permit portion of the ordinance that are going to be affected by this, because there are going to be some changes to some of the grids and that kind of thing. So,
Supervisor Seibert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've had a couple calls, and they were concerned about two things: outbuildings, because you know it's going to take a pretty good infrastructure when it comes to outbuildings to service these windmills, and staging areas was the second one. And the graveyard, when this stuff starts taking parts and
I've seen that.
yeah. How is that going to be zoned, and how is that going to be regulated? Are you going to allow to put one 500 feet next to my house?
I guess I can speak to that. So essentially, with the siting of these systems, there are specific standards set by the Public Service Commission, such as setbacks to non-participating property lines and residences. So one that comes to mind is 1,200 feet to a non-participating residence or property line. So you wouldn't be able to have a turbine, let's say 500 feet from your house, given that setback. But there are, I guess, allowances for participating parcels. So if you were to have one on your own parcel, you could, waive that setback requirement. But as a part of,
Excuse me, I think it was for outbuildings. I mean, they're going to have to put up a huge shed to store their equipment in, to store their, extra parts in. How is that going to be handled?
okay, so I can address that as well. So as a part of this proposed project and their application, they would submit a full plan including all of the infrastructure associated with it. So it'd be the lines connecting the turbines to the substation, the substation proposal. So we would look at this as the entire project, every aspect, every piece of infrastructure, and we would review that on a case-by-case, parcel-by-parcel basis to ensure it meets all those requirements, if that answers your question.
with respect to the graveyard, that would be
Decommissioning.
What's that?
I believe that would be a decommissioning, yeah.
That would be a decommissioning, and in terms of whether or not any of it would be disposed within Marathon County, that would be an issue that would have to have a specific permit. That's what I know about that. So.
Supervisor Robinson.
Close.
Yeah, caught myself.
I just want to spend some time. First of all, I want to thank both Dom and Scott for their work on this. And this is an issue that did come to infrastructure last summer, a year ago. And I think there have been a lot of concerns. I think there are some fundamental issues that you need to understand. First of all, the property in which the wind farm is located is generally governed by the third-party agreement between the landowner and the person owning that wind farm. So we're not into the area of regulating that. And those are third-party agreements where you need to be careful what you assign when you do this. Some of the amendments that we've done in the statutory provisions provide some protections to people in close proximity to that and allow for agreements that pay up to $800 or $1,000, again, set in statute or code. Our hands are tied, and by virtue of us incorporating those into our ordinance, we allow those payments to be made, whereas I'm not so sure that they would have been made if they were not in there. And we have expanded the public participation process, again, to be consistent with the administrative code and those requiring that public hearing, a repository, the ability to provide and receive and factor in written comments, which is important to the neighbors and those in the area. But we are not affecting, per se, the third-party agreement between the owner of the land in which the turbine is located. Those are governed by third-party civil agreements, and that those are resolved through litigation if there are disagreements once they're in place. But this provides, again, we take advantage of what the legislature and the Public Service Commission have authorized us to do, and we can't go beyond that. And I think it's a best product that we get within the current regulatory framework.
Okay, any other questions? Supervisor Gumbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It would really be nice to be able to see what we're reading if you're going to bring something to the board. I have a problem with that. Then it should be in paper copy if we can't see it up here. My question is, the townships, as a county, does anybody get any money out of that from the company, from the wind farms? And both locally or here in the county, do we get anything? And the reason there's more wind out west in Marathon County is because we're way higher than every year. We're downhill to Wausau. I think it's about 1,900 feet high, and we go down like 300 feet, 400 feet to get to Wausau. That's why we have more wind. Some of the supervisors have a lot too, I guess you could say.
Okay, any other questions or? Go
Yeah,
ahead, Dom.
so from my understanding, there are agreements that are set between the town and the wind energy producer. So there are, I guess, royalties set to the town in regards to the amount of energy produced. And I'm not familiar with any agreements that would be set with the county, but from talking with EDP, they had said that they would offer some agreements to offer compensation for the energy produced as a result of this project.
Okay, Supervisor Seiler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You've done a nice job, gentlemen, of explaining what will happen in these two towns that are county zoned. Can you remind us what would take place in the towns if landowners and the towns if they're approached in non-county zoned townships? What sort of protections could they seek, or what happens with those landowners and towns?
Okay, I guess I can address that one. So given that we have adopted these regulations within our Chapter 17 zoning ordinance, these standards only apply within the county zone towns, as you are aware. So there were discussions of adopting an ordinance that would apply to all towns regardless of zoning authority, but at this moment we decided to incorporate it in the zoning ordinance as a part of the annual revisions. If a company were to propose, or a landowner were to propose a wind turbine in a non-zone town or a town-zone town, it would be up to the town's zoning ordinance or ordinances to regulate that. So these provisions and regulations would not apply within those towns, but the towns do have the ability to adopt an ordinance consistent with state statute and administrative code.
All right.
Possibly consistent with ours.
Yeah, and they could.
You know, we're trying to create something that will stand the test of time.
Right, and given that, your comment on that, Scott, if, maybe there are, I'm sure that they have to go to a part of the county where there's going to be wind that's going to make this a practical and reasonable opportunity for the company. But I know that there's been an effort to encourage other towns to join county zoning, and I'm just wondering if this could be a really good opportunity to reach out to those towns who have no zoning or town zoning to say, just so you're aware, here's a new entity coming into our county. They may be seeking to do business in your area. Maybe a heads up. I mean, they may want to create their own ordinance or have something in place. But if what happened in these two towns where it seems the landowners were approached before we knew anything about it, it would certainly be, I think, a neighborly act to inform the other towns that this is happening, invite them to maybe join the county zoning, or at least give them the opportunity to be thinking about an ordinance and create some protections for the town and the landowners so they're, not at the mercy of the people wanting to sign those contracts.
Yeah, and I guess I can speak to that briefly. So that would be, I guess, with the addition of these regulations, that would be another, I guess, selling point and another benefit to join county zoning. So that would be something that we can reach out to those towns to see if that's something that would persuade them to adopt county zoning. But we can also be available to offer any assistance to those towns that wish to adopt their own wind regulations. So I think we can make that available to them with offering to join county zoning, as we're always open to have any towns that would like to join county zoning, join county zoning. But if those towns choose not to join county zoning, we're always there to assist and help with any technical.
Sure. That would be great. And I think the key message here is just to get the word out would be wonderful. So sooner the better. Thanks.
Supervisor Gomes.
Mr. Chair, you're very involved in county association. Have any of the counties, other counties, received payments from windmill type things that you're aware of?
There's been some discussion, but just briefly at WCA and the briefing that we had, that there was some dollars that was shared with local municipalities along with counties as far as in other states, but I'm not aware of the counties that are local. Okay, any other discussion? Supervisor Robinson.
I would move to adopt the substitute amendment to Chapter 17 reflecting those changes.
Is there a second to the motion? Supervisor Johnson with the second. Any discussion on the substitute amendment?
That's good.
Okay, any discussion on the substitute amendment? All right, we will proceed to vote on the substitute amendment.
Dom, do you have, can you
Just-
just call up, there are two more changes to the one that we published already for you to review, so. We did publish the original draft and then a revised draft with Mr. Robinson's changes. We did send that out in your packet to you. And then there were two other changes that were suggested by counsel for EDP. And again, those had to do with the standards that are applicable to the conditional use permits. And what that does is just makes reference to the administrative code and to the statute. So we would ask that be included in the substitute amendment.
I would agree that those would be incorporated into that motion.
Is the second good with that? Yes, all right. Now we'll proceed to finish the vote. Supervisor Beestrom, thank you. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. Excuse me, moving on to C14, Conservation and Planning and Zoning Director or his or her designee authorized to issue.
Hold on. That was the substitute amendment was moved. So actually, there hadn't been a motion on the floor. That takes the place of the actual motion. So it should be.
There was a motion.
Oh, was there?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that. I was thinking about my other stuff, so I apologize. Then you do have to vote on the ordinance as amended.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. I apologize.
All right, now as amended, any further discussion as amended with the substitute amendment in? Any further discussion? The original motion was seconded by Supervisor White. Who made the original motion before? Supervisor Nutting did. Okay, Supervisor Nutting made the motion. Supervisor White seconded the motion, and then we had the substitute motion by Supervisor Robinson, and that was seconded by Supervisor Johnson, and we have voted on the substitute amendment, and now we are back to the motion as amended to include the substitute amendment in the motion. Is everybody clear where we're at? Okay, we are amending the General Code of Ordinances of Marathon County, Chapter 17 zoning code with the substitute amendments included. Is everybody clear? And now, any further discussion on that? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed, and the motion is carried as amended. Now we'll move on to item C14, Conservation Planning and Zoning Director or his or her designee authorized to issue citations for violation of the Uniform Addressing System Ordinance 0-4-20. Motion by Supervisor Schaefer, second by Supervisor White. Any discussion? Supervisor McEwen, Vice Chair McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was not here on Thursday, and I understand there was a couple questions from board members about this ordinance. All this ordinance does is authorizes the CPZ department to enforce the uniform addressing system that we have in Marathon County. We do have the ability to enforce it now, before this was passed. However, it would be a long-form complaint that has to go through Corp Council and then through the courts, and that could take quite some time. And I know there's a step process before CPZ would issue a citation to encourage everyone who's not following the uniform addressing ordinance before a citation was issued. And a couple of the supervisors that I spoke to were concerned that 100% of the uniform addressing is not done. There's some cleanup that needs to be done. And I agree that there probably are some things that need to be cleaned up and cleared up with these different townships. And I did agree with the supervisor that there should be a follow-up with all the townships that were affected by the uniform addressing to see if there were any issues or any concerns that they had to address those concerns with those townships. However, I don't think that affects this ordinance as far as giving them the authority to issue a citation. So I would encourage everyone to vote for this. It simply gives them the authority. And it could be a lot quicker if they contact them versus going through a court system. So thank you.
Okay, any further discussion? There's a motion on the floor to approve. Any discussion? Supervisor Gums.
What are they going to give them the citation for?
It would, well, most likely, it would be someone that takes their sign down or a sign is missing. That's what the uniform addressing is basically the signs that were put up by the county, so it's uniform. I don't know what other violations could be done. The concern was for some street signs that were not put up or on both sides of the road, and I did tell them, the supervisor that I spoke to, that those would be issues that CPC should be working with these townships. But as far as any other violations, I don't know what else besides not having your flag sign up in your yard would be a violation.
Is there any other discussion? Supervisor Seibert.
On the violation end of it, you know, I've had some move the signs, take the sign off the post and put it in the mailbox. I've had some signs get knocked down by the county snowplow. Are they all gonna be, is the violation gonna be all one fee, or is there gonna be different levels, or is it gonna be? I mean, how about those situations where they move the sign?
Okay. I'd invite the Conservation Planning and Zoning Director up here. Ultimately, what the goal is to be able to have the sign available for public safety response. And so, and through the stepped enforcement process that CPZ is using, they're trying to encourage and require that the sign be available for public safety. So it is not to run out there and issue a citation because the snowplow knocked over the sign. I think the ultimate goal is to get the sign back up when it's feasible and installed so that public safety is the ultimate goal of locating that residence.
Thank you. Well put. Again, you've heard us say this in one of our. We have stated through this entire project, which started back in February 2016, that we are always going to err on the side of public safety. And the citation is going to be our last resort. We're only going to be addressing where we have a problem with an address in terms of public safety. And so when you talk about a plow knocking one over or something like that, that's not anything we'd ever issue a citation for. We would reach out to the property owner and help them to understand where they need to put the sign back, or in some cases they might have to order a new sign, and we're going to help them through that entire process. Our stepped enforcement now with all of our citations are ones in which we, no matter which of these ordinances that are listed, that we are doing some kind of enforcement on, we're always working first with the property owner, some kind of personal contact, either by a phone call or by sending them a letter, and we go through this process that may lead to a citation. We're not anticipating writing out multiple citations for uniform addressing. We're just building this in, just like all the other ordinances that we have, that if we do need to use it, that we have that available to us.
Okay, Supervisor Zhang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. I know that we mentioned a lot about signs, about these signs if they were to be removed or if they were to be, I guess, disappear in some sort. But what about clearing, snow from the signs? Would they be penalized, or if there was any, let's say, if they didn't clear those signs and there was snow on there and it wasn't visible? I guess I'm just kind of curious regarding that.
And I think it's more of an educational campaign for us. It's the same challenge that our highway department has with having people put up proper mailboxes on those roads that we plow, so that the mailboxes don't always get knocked over by the plow. So it's going to be that same type of thing. I envision this is something where if we have some problem, it might be the sheriff's department that's bringing it to our attention, that they responded to a certain situation, they couldn't find the sign, and it was an unsafe situation. And we would reach out to that property owner and try to get them to put the sign back up, if they pulled it out or whatever might have happened to it.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Thank you, Becky. We will then proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried but not unanimous. Moving on to resolutions from item D from Health and Human Services Committee. D15, to approve a successor agreement for the joint sponsorship of community programs between Marathon, Langlade, and Lincoln counties that create North Central Healthcare. Resolution 8-20. We have a motion by Supervisor Seefeld and seconded by Supervisor Tremelling. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we will proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. From Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee, item E-16, resolution awarding the sale of $8,500,000 general obligation promissory notes, Series 2020A. Motion by Supervisor Stark and seconded by Supervisor Budke. Is there any discussion? We have the Finance Director and Bond Counsel here if anybody has any questions. Financial Advisor. Supervisor Schaefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did we already get a interest rate on this?
Well, I'll invite the Finance Director and up to provide a brief explanation of where we're at.
Hi, good evening. I have Kristen Hansen here from PFM as well. We are issuing $8.5 million of debt tonight. Bids came in this morning at 10 a.m. We had 5 bidders, and what we want to do is just let you know that we had a really, really good day. And I'll quickly go through what we talked about at finance. This will take 1 minute because there's a fancy chart. I just want to let you know that Moody's did reiterate that we have a AA1 bond rating, and AAA is the best. One of the problems is with our demographics and size, we just really aren't the same as a large, like a Waukesha or Waukesha County, which I believe is still AAA. We just aren't that big, so AA1 is probably our best bet, second best credit rating you can get. So you're going to be in a market where the stocks went down almost 700 points today, and what people do is they run to quality. It's a flight to quality, and when you're a government municipality who guarantees your taxing authority to pay these notes back, their 10-year notes, people are really interested in because they're afraid of what's happening in the stock market. So today was an optimal day to be selling our notes. And so a lot of people were very interested in that. Oh, it's faster. So again, we just went over the sale. And as you can see in this slide, and Kristen, if you want to come on up and help me out here, I believe the blue line is showing you what we had in our rates. We issued $9.5 million in 10-year notes November of last year at an interest rate of, was it 1.76? 1.74. 3 months later, we issued $8.5 million in 10-year notes, and the gold line is the interest rate as of today, and you can see it has gone down again substantially. And with that, Kristen has the results of our sale.
So I'm Kristen Hansen, Director and Financial Advisor at PFM out of Milwaukee. We received 5 bids today, and because of what's happening in the stock market, as Christy indicated, you see a flight to quality. The interest rates, you received the best bid from R.W. Baird with a true interest cost rate of 1.16%.
For 10 years.
For 10 years. And you can see just the second place bid was 1.17. So first place and cover bid were very close. So we were very pleased with the results. Obviously, this will result in lower interest costs, lower debt service payments.
And with that, the Finance Committee accepted the award, reviewed and accepted the award for Baird to be the winning bidder tonight. But we want to share that with you because you probably aren't going to see rates this low again. but hopefully next time we go out to market, we have been doing quite well. So congratulations. One of the things you look at Moody's, it's our conservative budgeting practices, our strong financial support, and our average socioeconomic demographics in the area. So that I will. So you've got the full resolution in your packet, and it does request that we award the bid to Robert W. Baird. We'll close.
Supervisor Schaefer.
The finance director, if we would wait a day or two and the market keeps going down, would they pay us?
Well, okay, any further discussion? Thank you both. Any further discussion? Good news for the county and the taxpayers. The interest rate dropping like that affords the cost of doing these projects cheaper for the taxpayer in the long run. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. Thank you, and we'll proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on to item E17, a resolution determination by the county board that the emergency with respect to repair the reconstruction of the Marathon County Jail has ended. Resolution 12-20. What is your pleasure? Supervisor Opal with the motion and Supervisor Stark with the second. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. Item E18, a resolution amending the 2020 budget and transfer from contingency for $200,000 for jail medical costs and jail medical room capital project, Resolution 13-20. Motion by Supervisor Christensen and seconded by Supervisor White. Any discussion? Supervisor Schaefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can we have the finance director? What is our contingency down to?
That's the first dollars that we've used out of the contingency. So there's been no dollars out of the contingency as of today.
So we're 300,000, right?
Correct. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. That did require a 2/3 majority vote. And we'll move on to E19, tentative agreements for a 2020 and 2021 collective bargaining agreement between Marathon County and the Deputy Sheriff's Association, Resolution 14-20. We have motion by Supervisor Wagner and seconded by Supervisor Zhang. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. And we have E20, tentative agreement for the 2020-2021 Marathon County Salary and Benefits Ordinance for Sheriff's Department Lieutenants, Resolution 17-20. Supervisor Nutting with a motion and Supervisor Robinson with a second. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. Supervisor Gaber, could you please confirm? Thank you. And we'll proceed, and the motion is carried unanimously. We are down to item F, miscellaneous business, announcements and/or requests. Have a few announcements. Supervisor Seiler.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just like to draw everybody's attention, you'll find at your places a summary of the recent life report. This is something that's been done every 2 years since 1997. And what's really nice is that in the last several editions that the folks, the steering committee and the group that puts this report together has been working more closely with Marathon County. If you take a look at it, the changes, well, in this 12th edition, the report has 4 broad sections, and they are to be prosperous, healthy, safe, and then the life group adds connected. But it works hand in hand with the county as far as looking at the issues. Many county staff spend a lot of time, both as part of the steering committee, the executive committee, subcommittees, Becky knows that, around the table for 2 years, doing a lot of great work. So I hope that you'll take a few moments. This is just the snapshot. And in there, if you go to the Marathon County United Way website, you can also take a look at the full report. And something that's new this year that is really, really interesting and intriguing, there's something that's called the Marathon County Pulse, which is a public online data platform, and it gives users access to Marathon County population data. You can really take a deeper dive into a lot of really interesting information. So a really good tool, and thank you to all the staff at Marathon County that once again made this so successful. I'd also invite you, when you go to the Marathon County United Way website, to also take a look. It's the 2018 ALICE report, which is something that has been mentioned here a few years ago. But ALICE, the acronym stands for Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed. And if you take a look, get to the Marathon County page, and what that means for our residents is pretty jaw-dropping. And I think as policymakers, that anytime we pass anything that has revenue implications, we should be keeping these numbers in mind, because those are our taxpayers. Thank you.
Supervisor Krause.
Yes, I'd like to mention that in the life report, there's probably something on immunizations and how many children in the county are being fully immunized. And in I didn't get a chance to say something about the consent agenda, which we all voted on to approve all of those. In the Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee, there was to approve the 2020 budget transfers from Marathon County Department Appropriations R1020. And in that, there was the budget transfer authorization request, which wasn't for any additional money. We didn't need to approve any additional money because it's an existing program that is covered by a grant. But it's for immunizations. The goal is that 90% of the children in the county are up to date on their immunizations by age 2. And I'd like to point out that right now, children are required to have 75 different shots. Now, when we were younger, we only had maybe 10 or 15, but these children will have 75 shots by the time they're 16, 18, whatever. And I attended several Board of Health meetings, and there were hearings. There were 2 meetings where there were hearings, and they were about two to 3 hours for each hearing, and hundreds of parents attended those meetings with complaints about the reactions they've received, their children, their babies, their children, and they themselves received from the immunizations, from the shots. Some of them died, some of them are permanently disabled. And I have a concern about the quality control of some of these immunizations. And I just wanted to mention that because nothing was brought forth to this board about the fact that all these parents attended this meeting and they had complaint after complaint, injury after injury. And I myself have met some of those people who did not know I was on the county board, but they told me of they themselves and their family becoming very sick after having different shots and immunizations. So even though, you know, these departments are getting more money for immunizing children, I'm saying that there's a very serious health concern here, and I thought I'd bring it up to the people on the board. Thank you.
Okay, any other discussion or any other announcements? I have a few. The signatures are, clerk needs signatures from Public Safety, County Board, Health and Human Services, Human Resources, Finance and Property, Joint Airport Board. Also, the clerk would like to make an announcement that she has 10 Wisconsin Blue Books courtesy of Senator Petruski. They are on a first come, first served basis. And I would like to note the unfortunate passing of Supervisor Johnson's father, and on behalf of the board, and to offer our condolences to him and his family on behalf of the board. So with that, is there any other announcements? Motion by Supervisor Schaefer to adjourn, seconded by Supervisor Robinson. Any discussion? All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.